What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. I hope you're having a wonderful day, morning, evening, night, whenever it is you're watching this. And today we're gonna be talking about frame rates. So what are frame rates in filmmaking? Frame rates are the amount of images are captured per second in your footage. So there are a few standard frame rates out there. The first one is 24 frames per second, which is the motion picture cinema standard. Pretty much every movie you have seen was shot on 24 frames per second. Now there's also 30 frames per second, which is your television, news, broadcasting standard. If you follow the NTSC guidelines, which here in North America, we all do. And there's also PAL, which is shot at 25 frames per second. And this is something you would see if you lived in Europe. Now, cinema, it's built upon illusion. Sets recreates reality. Editing manipulates time. Visual effects do the impossible. But the first and most fundamental illusion is motion.
Motion pictures are based on an optical illusion. Just another case where seeing is believing.
And the general guidelines that most filmmakers follow is to keep their shutter speed at double their frame rate, which results in a nice mix of motion blur and sharpness. For example, in this shot, I was filming at 24 frames per second and I had my shutter speed at 48, creating a nice motion blur around my hands. Second example, I was filming at 60 frames per second and I had my shutter speed at 120. Creating a nice motion blur around my hand. So today I'm going to give you a tip, a slow motion hack, if you will. And this is very popular among music video directors. And I've seen it also on commercials too. And it's shooting at 48 frames per second. And if you do the math and you divide it by 2, it's basically 24 frames per second, which is your standard cinema frame rate. So what's really cool about this technique is that you get a twofer. You can shoot at 48 frames per second, which is like a slow motion. And then on post, you can speed it up twice and you get a real-time 24 frames per second clip. So let's take, for example, this clip. I'm playing it at 24 frames per second and then boom, slow motion at 48. And when you speed it up in post, your subject is going to be sharper because your shutter speed is at 1/96. So it won't have too much motion blur. But what about when cinematographers and videographers deviate from realistic speeds to tell their stories? Fast motion. Assuming we're playing back this clip at 24 frames per second. But when we lower our frame rate to 12 frames per second, it makes the motion look choppy because they lack frames. And you might be asking yourself, Gabe, what's the point of doing this way? For example, let's say that you want to recreate old home movies. This is a way to do it. Or for example, adding a comedy element to your scene. And this can be done by undercranking your camera to, let's say, for example, 2 to 6 frames per second. Now let's look at another reason why filmmakers and videographers shoot at lower frame rates. This technique is called step printing, and this is done with a low frame rate and often with a slow shutter speed to create motion blur. I want to show you a quick and easy way to recreate this effect in After Effects without the need to have the footage shot in a lower shutter speed. This can be done with any footage. And we're going to be using 2 effects to achieve this film look. So we are going to go to the effects and preset panel and we're going to go to the time folder and look for the CC white time and posterize time. These are the 2 effects that we're going to be using. So we're going to drag the CC white theme into our clip and we're going to add forward steps to add motion blur to our clip. As you can see, as we add steps, it starts to get blurry. And the other thing that we can do is to add the posterize time effect. So what this will do is only show a certain amount of frames per second. So we can take it down to 4, and this is how we're going to get the step motion or stop motion effect into our footage. The physical motion is at normal speed, but the amount of motion blur gives the impression of fast motion. Ideal to create a visceral and subjective footage. And now let's look at the opposite effect, slow motion.
If we want to slow down the motion of something that goes fast, we speed up our camera and make, say, 5 times as many pictures per second. We have slow motion when they are shown on the screen at normal camera speed.
Assuming you'll be playing back at 24 frames per second, you need to shoot at a higher frame rate than the playback. Say 48, 60, or even 120 frames per second, which is called overcranking. The higher the frame rate, the slower you can slow the footage while maintaining smooth motion and clarity. The key to remember when using slow motion is that it emphasizes whatever action or emotion you present it with. It can make horror more terrifying, action more spectacular, or comedy even more hilarious. Filmmakers utilize these extremely high frame rates to capture motion that the human eye cannot see. High frame rates also enable filmmakers to use speed ramps, like this one for example. Speed ramp is an editing technique used to transition between different speeds in the same shot, where each strike is given an extra weight and impact. But this topic deserves a video of its own. Stay tuned.